Yo, I want to talk about the WotC announcement through the Omenpaths and Digital Universes Beyond updates, what it means, why it's bad, and how I think it should be fixed. And it's important to note I didn't say could be fixed, but instead should be fixed. Because while I can't speak for all of you, I for one am certainly getting annoyed by the constant flip-flopping and out-and-out lies coming from this company. Unless they're actively looking to erode community trust, they better make some changes fast. Last week I put out this video, which is kind of a precursor to the one you're watching now. You don't need to have watched that video to understand my thoughts on this announcement though. I only mention it because as of time of writing this sentence, that video still doesn't go live for a couple more hours, so if you left comments or feedback, I'm not going to respond here because for me, they haven't happened yet. And even though reading this statement is what initially spurred me to cover it in a video, the one you're watching now by the way, I found I couldn't do that until I got my thoughts on Universes Beyond as a whole off of my chest for context so you knew my position going into it. Hence that video last week, which for me is still the future. Time! In a similar vein, it might also be worth knowing that while I do have a Magic Online account and have paid real money for their starter card packs, I don't actually play because, well, it looks like that, and after a game I realised there would be some hotkeys to learn and mildly more complex menus to navigate than I had patience for, so sorry Magic Online. I think you're good value and you would be my digital client of choice, but I haven't played since. Arena, on the other hand, I just think is bad. I won't play it. I talked about as much in this video where I discussed the disdain I also have for alchemy, and again more in depth during the first half of this video specifically about Arena as a whole and the issues I have with it. Issues that, after having read this announcement, I imagine will be exacerbated. Link to those videos below if you want to know more. But again, none of that is required watching to understand today's video. I just think it's important for you to have context as to who I am and where I'm coming from when I read this statement. And finally, I said during last week's video that I'd talk a little more today about my thoughts on universes within reprints as a concept, and it's complicated. I look at, for instance, two copies of the same artifact equipment, completely mechanically identical if not for the name and art, which have very little indication that they're the same card, and think, well that's bad because it's confusing. As we know from official statements and rules, for deck construction purposes we're to treat these cards as one and the same. But as Saffron Olive pointed out on Twitter, other non-universes within cards like these artifact equipments, which are similarly identical if not for the name and art, aren't the same card and so obviously don't have those deck construction restrictions applied to them. Confusing again, why is it one way for one and not the other? I thought that Fallen Empires was a failed experiment with its multiple copies of each card at common, all with unique art and flavour text on sometimes as many as up to 4 variants, with the lesson learned being that it was bad, because players were struggling to identify at a glance during games what the cards in play actually were. But then I look at Aetherdrift with its multiple copies of the same card with not just different arts but with wildly different treatments and think, so is it that we've learned nothing? Or is it that the lesson we learned with Fallen Empires was wrong, and actually being able to recognise the cards doesn't matter? The 5 unique art variants of Elesh Norn would certainly suggest that WotC agrees it doesn't matter, and potentially I'm inclined to agree. But then notice what I said. Elesh Norn, and not Elesh Norn Mother of Machines. And that's because personally at this point I've stopped bothering to try and remember what the cards actually are or do without reading them, or even what they're called. Do you know which of these is the original, simply called Elesh Norn, no epithet? Well, it was a trick question because it's this one, Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite, that was the original. It was actually this one, a later version, and not the original that had the exclusive Elesh Norn name. And these are 2 different cards. Do you remember what the rules text says? How about the one I showed earlier? No, it's because they all sort of bleed together. And that's not even factoring in all of their alt art versions. This is an overly confusing, complicated mess, but it's what the game is now. And hell, even I've suggested in the past that if Sol Ring has to be a staple of Commander and in every deck like Land, then having multiple art variants is a solution to the monotony of seeing the same card over and over. Like with Land, which thankfully is a direction they're already moving in. So if I'm willing to accept that, then is Universes Beyond card comes out and then there's a Universes Within counterpart that has new art and a new name, except in the case of Thumberchild, whose Universes Within version does get a new art but not a new name, really that much more complicated than what we saw with Elesh Norn and... I don't know, man. Yes? No? Is the difference that these cards aren't staples like Land? I'm starting to think that maybe all of it's bad and needlessly confusing. I get collectors want something rare to chase, but Christ. Maybe this is actually a benefit of serialization, like the cards at least look the same when played and the only difference is a tiny number. But even that's not true, as most of these have alt arts as well. In some cases, more than one. And all of this makes me think back to those Godzilla cards. because they had that little name box underneath, and that to me at least was a clear indication on the card itself that what I was looking at was a reskin of an actual Magic card. And I think more importantly, in most cases, the cards those Godzillas were reskins of only had a single art variant, and more commonly relied upon multiple frames for collectability, leaving the art to be more immediately recognisable, which in turn helped me at least remember what they did mechanically. So when it came to looking at the reskins, I would see the box and think, oh, that's a reskin of what? Well, there's not many of them. Oh yes, it's that card. Which, even though that is a bit more mental load during play, wasn't by an overwhelming amount, which meant I was still able to memorise the cards, solving that Fallen Kingdoms issue because that was like every common that had multiples. Even now, I still remember that Mechagodzilla was the crystalline giant with all of the keywords, Mothra was the luminous brood moth that resurrected creatures and gave them flying tokens, and Ghidorah was the dick one whose ability was being a dick. And even though they were all from the same set, there was still only really 20 of them tops, with only 2 all arts each for the most part, meaning I could remember what they do, but honestly, I cannot say the same about the cards that get multitudes of variants like Elesh Norn, just as I cannot say the same about most multiple treatment Aetherdrift cards, and I cannot say the same about most universes within. When there's too many reskins, too many versions, and too many unique arts for each card, there becomes too much going on, so I just don't bother to memorise any of them. Which even then would still be fine if the cards actually did what they said they did. Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and whoops, they left off some rules text on Thunderclap Drake and Memory Vessel, so those 2 cards required a day 1 errata, but neither have seen a reprint that reflects those updates since. Popular enough commanders Kunoros Hound of Athreos and Ascendant Evankar are a hound and vampire respectively, except, whoops, no they're not, they're actually a dog and Phyrexian Vampire Noble, even though they've not had reprints to reflect this either. And back to Ikoria for the infamous Companion mechanic errata, and while these at least have had reprints to reflect the change, that whole affair is still a bloody ball ache, innit? And those reprints were part of Multiverse Legends and thus rarer and presumably more expensive to obtain than the initial prints. WotC should not get to profit from fixing the mistake or correcting in post something that they shouldn't have put out in the first place if they were going to change it later. Paper is not digital, you can't just patch this stuff like in an update. And if WotC really want us to not care about the recognisability of the cards based on their art or name, because there are so many versions of so many cards, and instead just rely on reading the rules text to know what something is, then they should at the very least ensure that once a card is printed, that rules text is either unchanging or reprinted to reflect the change, at a low cost, because an errata should never inconvenience the player, not even financially. And honestly, I think my suggestion at this point would just be use the Godzilla name box on all reskins, as it easily signifies the card as being an all art. And to reduce mental load on the player, ensure the card that name box references is the one true original version. The card prime, if you will, that does not have any other alt art prints outside of alternative frames with the same art. Because then that way players only have to remember one set of cards and everything else is surplus and easy to ignore. And yes, that does mean I'm suggesting taking cards like this version of Elesh Norn Mother of Machines and adding a little Godzilla box underneath that reads Elesh Norn Mother of Machines just to quickly inform anyone looking at the card during play that this is not the prime version. And for simplicity to ignore the art and just read the name. An insane fix, true, but one that I actually think solves the issue Saffron Olive brought up about telling the cards apart, and one that will help people that don't like reskins like Universes Beyond to ignore them going forward. And I can't believe I'm saying it, but as much as SpongeBob was a low point for Magic, it at least got that bit right. Christ on a bike, if we do not read this article, we're never getting to it. Let's zoom in before I have to push talking about it back another week. Okay, here we finally go. Port is Left asked, is it too much to ask for in-universe versions of the Lord of the Rings set? I know the art and concepting is a big resource drain, but it's something I think a lot of people would like to see, just curious, smiley face. To which Mark Rosewater replies, doing a handful of cards for a secret lair is manageable, doing an entire set is not. Wait, hang on a second. This isn't from that article. That's Magic Head Designer's Tumblr where he's telling someone an entire Universes Within set isn't a possibility because it just isn't manageable for WotC to do. How did that accidentally get there? Sorry everyone, let's go back to the real announcement. Right, for real this time. Uniquely collectible, it says. The goal is not, however, to hold back mechanical expressions and game pieces from players who don't purchase through our direct-to-consumer channel. I assume they mean like Arena, where it's the only place to buy most alchemy cards, for instance. In other words, we want to give you options for finding the game pieces that you want to use. Right, because if you don't like Universes Beyond, being forced to use one when a Universes Within version exists would be needlessly frustrating. For players who don't mind waiting or prefer cards and characters set in Magic's multiverse, that's me, We have you covered as well. Good to know, that's really reassuring, but hang on. Oh no, I've done it again, silly me. That was their Secret Lair Universes Beyond update announcement, which was the wrong thing again. How could I have accidentally read the wrong thing twice? God, it's a good thing comedy comes in twos. Right, let's try again. Okay, here we go, through the Omenpaths and Digital Universes Beyond updates. That's the right article, so let's scroll down. Before we showed them the numbers, so to speak, with Stranger Things, we weren't surprised that people were a little bit skeptical, Egan admits. Now that we're making these in-world equivalents for these cards, we want those to be around and we want people to be able to get their hands on them. And then Mark Hegan, Vice President of Collectable, says, we want their in-world equivalents to be the ones that are there for people who are just looking for gameplay. Excellent to hear, that's exactly me again. But whoopsie daisy, I've done it another time. You won't believe it, but that's not the article either, but actually from an interview given about how important it is for us players to get our hands on the in-universe versions of those Street Fighter cards. And for the universes within Reprints to be the prime versions, as it were. Interesting though, isn't it? Now that we're going into the article for real, knowing that WotC say it's not possible to make universes within versions of full sets, but that players should have the option when it comes to which version of game pieces they play, and it's important for players to get their hands on the universes within cards physically. Just some unrelated things to bear in mind, I'm sure. Right, for real this time, through the Omenpaths and Digital Universes Beyond updates, scroll down. It's the real one, I promise. Every time we release a Universes Beyond set, we get a similar question. Is this going to be on Magic the Gathering Arena and Magic the Gathering Online? We've typically handled this on a set-by-set basis with an answer that has either been fully yes or demonstrably no. To which I would ask, but why though? No answer given. We'd love for the answer to always be yes, but sometimes things just don't work out that way. But what do you mean? Surely you're the one signing the contract and developing the cards for Arena. Don't just shrug as if it's an accepted thing and natural part of Universes Beyond that they aren't for everyone. Dividing the player base and making products exclusive to certain formats only serves to create confusion and frustration. I said it before, but I love Children of the Nameless, so why is it that the only versions of the characters from those books are on Arena? I don't want to play Arena, I want them in paper. So when you say this, tell us exactly why the answer isn't always yes. You are the creator, WotC. If the answer is a no, it's because you made it that way. But all along we wanted a more permanent solution, and with Universes Beyond sets being legal in all formats starting with this year's releases, we need a consistent and reliable answer. Enter through the Omenpaths. Okay, and I think that's important to remember. They're doing this for consistency, which in its absence creates confusion, and reliability, which in its absence creates uncertainty. Things as consumers we don't want. So I will say that as principal goals for this decision, I think these are good for the customer and for customer relations with WotC. Scroll down. Through the Omenpath releases will be digital sets, that are universes within versions of Universes Beyond sets that otherwise wouldn't be coming to digital Magic platforms. No wait, again, stop. Why wouldn't these be coming to digital? Explain yourself. You're the one signing the contract, what message does that send about the importance of Arena if you don't think it's worth securing the rights to publish your sets there? Or is it that the sets themselves aren't that important if they're not going to be on Arena? Are you hinting that the Spider-Man set is going to be bad and not worth buying? Also, only the Universes Beyond sets that wouldn't be coming to digital? The reliable thing would be if all Universes Beyond sets were getting this treatment. What happened to reliability? Are we giving up one of our principles already? These digital cards will be mechanically identical to their Universes Beyond tabletop counterparts, but with unique creative treatments, different art and different names. And what does that mean, unique treatments? That's something Vice President of Design Aaron Forsyth said in response to that Saffron Olive tweet. Different treatments. But have you seen the cards they've already put out? They just look like any other regular Magic cards to me. How are you supposed to be able to tell at a glance that one of them is a reskin? Is whatever I'm not seeing there the different treatment that you're talking about here? We will not be creating through the Omenpath sets mirroring every Universes Beyond set, only the ones that will not be coming to digital platforms. And there goes consistency too. This lets our formats remain mechanically at parity with one another digitally without having to create patchwork solutions here or there. Are you out of your mind that you think that this do it for one set but not another isn't a patchwork solution? We are also currently only planning to create through the Omenpaths releases for full sets that are legal in all formats. Right, Christ. So they can make universes within versions for full sets then. So I guess when Mark Rosewater said that wasn't possible, it was a lie. And some Universes Beyond sets aren't coming to Arena, so I guess when they said about wanting players to have the option to use the game pieces they want, it was also a lie. And I noticed they avoided the obvious question of whether these Universes Within sets would come to paper. I'll assume that's not happening then, so I guess when they said about wanting people to get their hands on Universes Within cards physically, it was yet another lie. They say they don't want Patchwork Solutions and they're doing this to be consistent and reliable. But then you read it and they contradict themselves immediately. Another obvious lie. This is such a mess and there's no need for it. This exclusivity of sets is bad for both paper and Arena players, and bad for both fans of Universes Beyond and those that want to avoid it. And with two identical sets with the same cards having different names and arts, God knows how many versions of each card there will be, which is just a huge mental load for everyone to bear. I said at the start I know how these issues should be fixed, but it's such an obvious answer I'm sure they don't need me to say it. But hey WotC, just print the fucking Universes Within versions. Bring them to paper so people can have a choice like you said was important to you. And renegotiate your contract with Marvel to get those Spider-Man cards on digital. And if you can't, then don't sign the contract in the first place. And either give those cards Godzilla name boxes so we know which is the prime version for simplicity, or remove the needlessly complicated deck construction limits for cards with different names and arts. And stop lying to your customer, we're not stupid, we don't have the memory of goldfish. You can't keep saying something to us and then going back on it without expecting us to notice. It's becoming apparent that all you care about is profit, but what do you think is going to happen next if you continue to erode consumer trust like this? You are currently in the fuck around stage, WotC. It shouldn't be left to me to inform you of what comes next. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you to everyone that supports me, like Eggboy the particle that permeates all existence, Wanpako Jozu, Miss Murder, a random Patreon, and the rest of my patrons whose names are on screen now. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this video, me and my Patreon page, where you can get your name credited on screen too. Check it out in the link in the description below. I forgot to plug it this week, so please do go check me out. Hit the like button, leave a comment, install an ad block, and most importantly, subscribe and share this video with a friend. Hit the notification bell and do all those things the algorithm loves. If you agree or disagree with any of my points, or you want to see me do a video on another subject, let me know and I will see you next time.